Hello, everyone. Welcome to Teacher Development Webinars. Good evening, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. And my name is Manullah Sand. I facilitate virtual programs at Teacher Development Webinars. Teacher Development Webinars is a social action project to support the teachers and educators around the world with professional development opportunities. It is an initiative using the rise in online PD to connect people from around the world with opportunities which they may not have had due to old and normal of face-to-face conferences. And we are celebrating International Mother Language Day webinar series. International Mother Language Day webinar series aims to celebrate linguistic diversity and multilingualism. It is intended to promote awareness of equity and inclusion in education through discussions about linguistic human rights, importance of mother tongues, language sensitization, and other concerns about language. And in this webinar is supporting local languages of students in classroom through multilingual pedagogy from competition to collaboration among languages in Pakistan. Guest speaker Kashif Raza will be sharing strategies that may help teachers plan lessons which include opportunities for developing target language in collaboration with local languages of the learners. Now it's my pleasure to welcome Kashif Raza for this webinar. Kashif Raza is a lecturer in English and faculty senator at Qatar University. He has previous start in the USA and Pakistan and has served on various leadership positions. His research interests include language policy and planning, educational leadership, expectations and perceptions in education, second language writing, and legal English. His forthcoming work is a co-edited book on the policy development in TESOL and multilingualism that argues for collaboration between English and other languages for coexistence and co-development. We are pleased to have you, Kashif. Welcome to Teacher Development Webinar.
Thank you, Manullah Saab, and your team. So I'll share my screen.
Great.
Can you see it?
Yep.
Okay. Do you want me to wait a while? Because some people may be joining a little late. Or should we go ahead?
Yep, sure. So,
like 2 or 3 minutes?
If you could make it a screen share.
Are you not seeing my screen?
I am, but if you could make it full.
Oh, okay. All right.
I see two screens. Okay.
Right. Okay. All right. So let me stop sharing. And what I'll do is this. Can you see me now? Are you still seeing half of the screen?
Yeah, it's like two screens are there.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yep, we can.
Oh, you can. Sorry. Okay.
F5 will do. Make it yes, F5. Go to presentation and press F5. It will maximize your screen.
No, it's fine. It's fine now.
It's actually maximized. Yeah. Okay. Great. Thank you.
Good to go. Great.
Okay. All right. So we'll get started. So thanks everybody for joining us today, and thank you to Manullah and his team for inviting me to give this session. So in this session, we're basically talking about some of the strategies that teachers can use to support the local languages of their students in the classroom. Especially, I'll be giving some examples from Pakistan because that's where I come from. And with a rich knowledge of the education system that I have been through, I'll be including some examples to make teachers think about different ways they can accommodate the needs of their students. So we'll get started. In this session, we're basically going to have an overview of monolingualism, multilingualism, and what does research say on languages in Pakistan, just a brief overview to set the context. And then we're going to look at how some of the ideologies we are wrestling with create competition instead of collaboration between languages in Pakistan. Then a critical question which many of us who teach English ask ourselves: what can we do as teachers in the classroom? So I'll be sharing some of my examples that the ways I have integrated different languages in the classroom, and hopefully those will be helpful. And these examples would be based upon a teaching adaptation model that I developed for myself and then proposed in 2018, and then I revised it in 2020. So I'll be using that as an example of the ways teachers can think about integrating different languages in the classroom. During this session, I will also be switching between different languages. So I am an English speaker, but I'm also a multilingual speaker, which means I speak Urdu, Punjabi. I can understand a little bit of Arabic. So during the session, I'll be switching between 3 languages so that, because it's a mother language day, Urdu and Punjabi are my mother languages. So like a couple of years ago, I've decided that when I give sessions, I will also showcase my multilingualism, because although we have a lot of research done on multilingualism, but it's mainly, sometimes it's through monolingualism, which is English or one language. So I thought it would be a good idea to showcase multilingualism in research or when we talk about multilingualism. So I'll be switching between different languages. Okay. I planned this activity. And then we'll have questions and answer sessions. I planned this activity for language speakers from Pakistan, those who understand English, Urdu, and Punjabi, just to get an idea of how they are thinking about different languages. And then we'll get started with our discussion. Amanullah, I think your mic is on. If you could mute it. Okay, so what I'll do is I will post the link in the chat. Where is it? Okay, so I'll come back here and I will post the link here. Okay, so if you are any of these speakers, please take the survey. It's a quick one, not going to take a lot of time. And then we come back and have a look at the responses. Okay. And for everybody else, you may be wondering, what is this survey about? And I'll just take you to the next screen here. It's just a survey about the ways we use language in the classroom or in society. So I'm asking people to kind of choose their answers. Which sentence or which type of sentences make sense to them? And the sentences, for example, this is first question and this is second question, just to get an idea of how people are thinking about languages and language use in the classroom or in society. And then we'll move from there. So I'll give, let's say, 2 minutes. Okay, so hopefully people are done. Let's go and look at the answers or responses. I think we got 2 responses. So here, if you can see my screen, I'll share it again. It's here. So in the first sentence, I basically asked that if we have a conference, which language would sound appropriate in terms of choosing the conference theme? And we can say 50% said English and 50% said Urdu. Okay. we have had, like, nobody said, okay, I think the number is increasing, so more people are saying Urdu than English. Then I gave a few examples of sentences. For example, the first sentence was, I think, one of these sentences. Let me see if I can pull out the question as well. Okay, I'll go to my drive and look at the questions. Yeah, here. So the first question was given in Urdu, and what happened was it's all Urdu. There is no Arabic, no English, or no Punjabi or any other language. And majority of the people are saying it's acceptable. Then the second sentence was in English with some Urdu in it. For example, a good sawal is half jawab. So it's like half and half. If I come to the answers, it's like split. Some people are saying acceptable, and other people are saying sometimes acceptable, which means not always acceptable. The third question was, it used some Punjabi in it, and the rest is Urdu. So जो लोग उर्दू या पंजाबी बोलते हैं उनके लिए इसमें कुछ अल्फाज उर्दू के हैं और कुछ पंजाबी के हैं. And if I look at it, look at the responses, 33% are saying acceptable, the rest are saying sometimes acceptable. The next question it's all in Punjabi. And if I look at the responses, majority of the people are saying sometimes acceptable, some are saying acceptable. And the last question, or the last, next, sorry, is Punjabi, English, and Urdu, both. And I see people are saying sometimes acceptable, which is interesting. And the last is all English. And I think some people are saying acceptable, others are saying sometimes acceptable, but majority acceptable. So we can see that the responses are split when it comes to using more than one language within a sentence. And we can see that people are responding to these things differently. And this is what we are going to discuss today. The purpose of doing this was to see how do we respond to multilingualism at social level or in the classroom level. We'll come back to this after the session and see whether our response to the questions would change or not change. And I'm not saying which one is correct or not until we go through the session. I'm going to use my clock so I keep track of time. Okay, so when we think of monolingual ideologies or yak zabani nazariyat, we're thinking, or people who believe in monolingualism, they believe that monolingual speakers are better because they speak one language, so they are better than multilingual speakers. And monolingual or multiple languages pollute each other. When we switch between different languages, basically we're polluting. We're not following the standard format of languages. And then single language works better for administration. An example of this is CPAC, the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor going on in Pakistan. The government is using English as a medium of information creation, dissemination, because they believe English works better. It's an international project. On the Chinese side, they're using Mandarin, and they believe that Mandarin reflects everyone's language. Another monolingual ideology is that there are hard boundaries between languages. So you cannot easily switch between languages or cross between languages because languages are different from each other. But if we look at multilingual ideologies or kathir lisani nazariyat, we believe that multilingual speakers perform better. If you are a multilingual speaker, you can switch between languages and you can communicate with more than one person. And multiple languages support each other. Again, you can shuttle between different languages. A subsequent point related to multiple languages is that it brings diversity in terms of knowledge, skills, ideas creation. And then another multilingual perspective is that the boundaries between languages are soft and fluid, which means you can easily switch or shuttle between languages, like Suresh Kanagaraj says. Okay, some examples from Pakistan. So what kind of monolingual ideologies do we wrestle with in Pakistan? I think one that I have observed is that mixing English, Urdu, Punjabi, or Pashto is a flaw. So when students communicate in the classroom and they jump to the second language or their first language, teachers believe that this is a flaw. They have failed to produce English, and that's why they're using their first language as a resource. Instead of seeing it as an advantage, they see it as a disadvantage. Code switching between English and Urdu or other languages should be strictly monitored. Means if you are switching between different languages, especially English, Urdu, Sindhi, Punjabi, or Pashto, it should be strictly monitored. It should not happen naturally. So there should be some rules. And other monolingual ideology, which is commonly observed, is that because I speak Urdu or English, that's my mother tongue. So which means you can have only one mother tongue. You cannot have two mother tongues. And then the boundaries between the languages that are spoken in Pakistan are unbreakable, means you cannot easily switch between languages because they are distinctly different from each other. And finally, home language is not appropriate for classroom. You cannot speak the language that you're speaking at home in the classroom because it's low quality or it does not look very academically appropriate. But if we look at multilingual ideologies, they contest all of these. One thing that Suresh Kanagaraja has been talking about, and this phrase has become very common, is shuttling between languages. It's a skill rather than a flaw or a fault. When a student is naturally switching between multiple languages, he or she is showing her skill of naturally using multiple languages in one conversation. Another multilingual ideology is that Urdu, Punjabi, Sindhi, or whichever languages we're talking about can be used for communication. It's not that you should use English or Urdu all the time. People who are monolingual, they feel pride in saying, I don't speak Urdu, I don't speak Sindhi, I don't speak Punjabi, although they come from those families or those language groups. So multilingual ideologies convince you or encourage you to acknowledge that you are a multilingual person. And multilingualism is a competence rather than a flaw. And one can easily swim between languages, so you don't have to stick to one language. I think at social level we do it all the time. In all the conversations you see on the media or otherwise, we see people swimming between different languages, but when it comes to classroom, people normally kind of restrict themselves to monolingualism. And finally, home language is not inferior language. It's a resource that students can bring to the classroom, and it provides opportunity for students to link the knowledge they're learning from the classroom with their home language, knowledge learned at home. And I'll be showing you some examples of multilingual perspectives and multilingual practices that we do in our classroom here at Qatar University. And that will give you an idea of how I am approaching multilingualism. In terms of research, we've also seen some monolingual ideologies dominate our policy discourses. For example, English is a colonial language and it should not be learned by anybody. So we should all give up English. We should not be doing it. A second thing which I've recently seen is that English is the most important language, and that's why it should be the medium of instruction, especially people who argue for internationalization of Pakistani education. They argue for English, using English as a medium of instruction only. I've also seen some research done on English only, and then that kind of research, it's kind of, in my opinion, it does not reflect the language practices, and it claims that English has completely failed in Pakistan. One reason I'm saying it does not reflect is because it does not always consider the value of Pakistani English, the way it is developing and the way it is being used. And when you compare the language spoken by Pakistanis against the international standards or international version of English, for example, British English, American English, then people start assessing the local language speakers, saying, okay, since you do not meet those criteria, you are not a fluent or an expert language speaker. Another one, which I have kind of seen a lot being talked about by particular people with particular perspectives towards Urdu, is that it is not a local language. It is an immigrant language, or in Urdu we say Muhajir Zuban, means it belongs to a specific community living in Karachi, but it's not a language of the local community. If we look at the history of Urdu, so Urdu is older than Pakistan. Pakistan is probably 80 years old, but Urdu is more than a centuries old language. And it was in this region. For example, Iqbal was born in Sialkot, and he wrote his poetry in Urdu, Urdu, Persian, and English. He wrote his work in English as well. So it's not an immigrant language, and it doesn't belong to a specific community. It belongs to Pakistan. And we have seen some kind of news in the media where Punjabi is promoted or displayed as an elite language spoken by specific elite politicians, or it's a vulgar language or language of the lower class. I'm using Punjabi as an example because I'm a Punjabi speaker, but these things are also observed in terms of other languages as well. Or we have seen that Sindhi cannot exist with Urdu. I mean, it's a political perspective towards languages. Or everyone must speak Urdu. Again, that's also a perspective we've seen in research, that since it's a national language, everybody should be able to speak Urdu. And if you speak Urdu, some other perspectives are that if you speak Urdu, it may pollute your other languages, which are Punjabi, Sindhi, Pashto. So this perspective looks at the hegemony of Urdu and how Urdu has damaged other languages. And finally, people also argue for not mixing Urdu and English. And I think a lot of this work uses the perspective of code switching, that code switching can be used, but it should be strictly monitored. You cannot let people naturally swim between different languages. Okay, so what happens is last year I did a chapter for a book which Dr. Naziha Ali and Dr. Christine Koom are editing. It should be out soon. So I looked at some of the policy proposals that I just showed you quickly. And I noticed 4 issues with all those policy proposals or discussions. One of them, for example, is lack of collaboration between researchers from different languages. So majority of the proposals were either talking about English or talking about English and Urdu or talking about other languages. But Pakistan is a multilingual country with 78 plus languages. 70 plus languages, my mistake. And if you are simply focusing on one language, you are minusing out the other languages. And I personally believe that when you talk about a multilingual context through a monolingual or bilingual lens, you are basically underestimating or not reflecting the linguistic landscape of the country or the territory which you are exploring. The second thing I noticed was the impracticality of the proposals. They either take a very extremist approach. For example, they say minus out every other language and just use one language. For example, we looked at English as a medium of instruction. So that sounds very impractical. It does not please everybody in the country. The third was tendency towards monolingualism. Again, going back to English, that English should be the medium of instruction, or Urdu should be the medium of instruction, or bilingualism, English and Urdu. What about other language speakers? Where do they go? And finally, the confusion about the role of language speakers, or how should those language policies be devised? Should government take control? So that's a top-down policy formation. Should we look at the perspectives of the people? That's a bottom-up approach. Or should we take a middle way? For example, a couple of years ago, the government of Punjab did a project. They kind of collected data from parents, teachers, students, asking for the medium of instruction they would like in the schools. And then they implemented Urdu as a medium of instruction in Punjab. and that was kind of replaced with the one single national curriculum approach that the current government has introduced. So this is a tussle, like who should we ask when it comes to policy development? And this chapter is upcoming in hopefully in 2021 this should be out if you would like to read. What happens when we have this tussle is that Dr. Dudley Reynolds has talked about. It creates kind of a competition between languages, and his report was published in 2019, and I translated it in Urdu because I thought this talks a lot about what's going on in Pakistan. If you look at, for example, here, education reproduces status quo. So this is like an ideology of competition on the left side. The report basically discusses how different perspectives see the existence, definition, and value of languages. Either it's one language or multilingualism. So when we come to monolingual ideologies, they look at languages in terms of continuing or reproducing status quo, which means if there is one language which is used as a medium of instruction, that should continue, that should not change. But principles of collaboration would argue for uh, accommodating dynamic needs of individuals and societies and revisiting language policies, looking at languages in a different way. Same thing about in terms of definition of languages. The ideologies of competition argue that languages are separate. They are separate phenomena that they cannot live together. But the principles of collaboration would argue for looking at multilingualism holistically. Means look how languages are functioning, how languages are working outside of the classroom, and then bring them in the classroom. And finally, in terms of valuing languages, the monolingual perspective would say that majority languages are basically problem for national identity. So they argue that the identity of a nation can be created or maintained through a single language. For example, in Pakistan, if Urdu is the national language, means everybody must speak Urdu because that's your national identity. But the principles of collaboration argue for respecting differences. Not everyone is supposed to learn and speak Urdu or Punjabi or Pashto or Sindhi. We need to respect differences. So the report was also translated in Urdu. You can also see how some of these, I thought when I translated it, I thought it would be convenient for multiple language speakers in Pakistan to access the information through Urdu. Especially because those language discussions happen in academic disciplines or at academic spaces like university schools, and the majority of us understand Urdu, so that's why I thought Urdu would be a more appropriate language for translation. Okay, so where do we go from here? What can teachers do? If you want, I actually interviewed Dr. Dudley on this report, and that was also recorded. If you want to watch the interview, you're more than welcome to Google it on YouTube. If you use the same title, I'm sure you can find the video on YouTube. Okay, coming back to our question, what can teachers do to promote multilingualism in the classroom? We've seen how languages create a difference. We've seen how languages create language discussions create competition. So what can teachers do to promote multilingualism in the classroom? I'll be showing you some examples from how I promote multilingualism in my classroom using a model that I developed as a teacher. This is not something like I believe or argue that would change, like revolutionize the education system, but I'm showcasing it because it has really worked well in my classroom, and I thought some teachers may be able to learn from it. If you put it in a simple way, I use it as a chart and I take notes. So I print it, I keep it with me, I make my notes, and using those notes help me to integrate different languages of my students in the classroom and then facilitate multilingualism or multilingual discussions inside the classroom. So let's have a look. The first thing I do is to increase an understanding of the student population. Or in Urdu we say अपने तलबा को जानना, उनके बारे में समझना, ये जानना कि वो हैं क्या, उनकी जुबानें क्या हैं, वो कौन कौन सी जुबानें क्लास में लाते हैं. And this is because I believe that there's a strong relationship between a language instructor's understanding of a student's abilities, which are language abilities, and then creating a successful learning atmosphere. So whatever language students speak is important in the classroom. For example, if I think of Punjabi, Punjabi de काफी सारे लहजे ने और पंजाबी मुख्तलिफ लहजे च बोली जाती. पाकिस्तान ਦੀ अगर ਤੁਸੀਂ ਗੱਲ ਕਰੋ ਜਾਂ ਪੰਜਾਬ ਦੀ ਗੱਲ ਕਰੋ, ਪੰਜਾਬ ਵਿੱਚ ढेर सारे ਐਕਸੈਂਟਸ ਨੇ. ਅਗਰ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਇੱਕ ਸ਼ਹਿਰ ਛੋੜ ਕੇ ਦੂਜੇ ਸ਼ਹਿਰ ਜਾਓਗੇ, ਤੁਸੀਂ ਮੁਖਤਲਿਫ ਕਿਸਮ ਦੇ ਲਹਿਜੇ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਉਹ ਮਤਲਬ ਦੇਖੋਗੇ. ਉਹਨਾਂ ਮੁਖਤਲਿਫ ਲਹਿਜਿਆਂ ਨੂੰ, ਮੁਖਤਲਿਫ ਜ਼ੁਬਾਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਵੀ ਕਲਾਸਰੂਮ ਵਿੱਚ एक्सेप्ट करना, एक मल्टीलिंगुअलिज्म ਨੂੰ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਉਹ ਪ੍ਰਮੋਟ ਕਰਨਾ, मल्टीलिंगुअलिज्म ਵਾਸਤੇ ਇੱਕ ਰਾਹ ਪੈਦਾ ਕਰਨਾ. And then I used what Aronin has called dominant language constellation approach. And this approach argues that the languages spoken by different language speakers are important, and they should be kind of brought into the classroom in the activities that teachers create, the techniques that teachers use, and the materials that teachers develop. And based upon that, a teacher can easily create an environment where everyone's needs are met, and the resources and the knowledge and information that students bring to the classroom from their society, from their home, will become resources that teachers can develop upon. So what do I do as a teacher? One thing you can start with is the question asking yourself, what languages do my students speak? Like when I switched to Punjabi, I was basically saying that there are different accents of Punjabi. Punjabi is not spoken with one accent. That's the same in other languages as well. So what accents and languages are students bringing to the classroom? And then what are the shared linguistic resources? Some languages have shared resources. For example, vocabulary used in one language may also be used in a different language. As we go through the slides, I will show you how I look at the language resources between Urdu, English, and Arabic when I teach legal English to my students, and how that helps me accommodate my students' language needs. And the third question teachers can ask, what can be done about it? So where do we go from there? What I propose is using a pie chart like this. So you have the main language or the target language that you're teaching to your students, and then maybe the main language is your language if you are the native speaker of that language, or that may not be your language. And then you look at students' languages. So basically creating space for all the language in the classroom where every language is equal. How do I do it? The picture on the right side is what Aronin used in one of the chapters that she's contributing to our forthcoming book. So the setting is a Norwegian society where English is the target language, and these are the other languages used by students or the faculty. On the left side is my chart from my classroom using the same approach. You see, English is the target language that I am teaching to my students. And my language is Urdu and Punjabi, and students' language is Arabic. By creating or using a chart like this, I increase my understanding of my students. What languages are they bringing to the classroom? When we do activities, we try to use resources from these languages to develop a better understanding of what we're learning. Here's an example, for example. So this is an example from a legal English course, which is a mandatory course for my students. These students are studying their major in Arabic, but they have to take this course as a mandatory course. And this is the last course they take with us. So we call it an exit course. And this is critical in terms of their graduation. The student population is between 18 to 40 years old, male and female. The language the textbook we're using uses British legal English. And the textbook is designed for lawyers who study their English, study their major, which is law, in English. And the struggle that my students and I have in the classroom is that the legal vocabulary is normally contextualized. Context is very important when we look at legal vocabulary, because a legal system defines those legal terms. And some of the terms which we had to wrestle with were not commonly used in this context. For example, union, like teacher unions, lawyer unions. That was something completely different for my students because they're not familiar with the term union because we don't have unions in this context. So the way I approached multilingualism in the class was me and my students were kind of feeling lost, that the terms we are learning have nothing to do with their context. What can we do to develop an understanding of the target vocabulary, but also link them with the knowledge and the information they have developed from previous courses they have taken in Arabic? So we created a chart like this. We had the target vocabulary, legal vocabulary. Then I invited them to show me or suggest the Arabic definition to those words. And I brought the Urdu definitions. And the reason for doing this was to see how language used in Urdu is different than language used in Arabic. Because Pakistan has Urdu and English used in their legal system. So these terms were commonly used. And me coming from a legal background, it was easy for me to borrow these terms. When we translated these terms, we also looked at the definition of the terms in Arabic or Urdu to make sure we are translating the words in the right way. And it was not just a simple translation. We were not just learning the meanings of these words. We were also putting them in practice by kind of putting them into activities and tasks. For example, we were looking at the court system, how a court functions. And what I invited my students to do is take a picture of a Qatari court, compare it with a court in the US or UK or Pakistan, and give a short presentation. And this is what one student did. She or he took a photo, and as you can see, the student used the Arabic terms and the English terms. Because they practice their legal law in Arabic, it's very important that they are familiar with those terms in Arabic as well, and they can relate them to Arabic so that they don't confuse their clients or they are not confused themselves. Then they come to the classroom and they use both languages to give a presentation. So when they, for example, talk about the judge and the placement of the judge, they use English and Arabic both. So me and my students, both of us understand what they're talking about. And I received very good feedback from students. For example, here's an example of how students coming from different disciplines or different jobs use that. For example, one of my students is working in Ministry of Labor, where they have to speak legal English with their clients because not everybody speaks Arabic here in Qatar. So this activity gave them an idea of where they are coming from and the differences between the definitions of the terms in English and Arabic. So this student listens to the problems of people and then translates them in Arabic. And by being familiar of the terms in both languages, the student was able to do a better job. Another one works in human resource department, and then they work with work in terms of employee relations. And this student also found this activity helpful. Because we have very little time, but this is a suggested activity you could do in your classroom. For example, brainstorm what languages you are bringing to the classroom or your students are bringing to the classroom. There would always be a main language, whether it's English, Chinese, Urdu, Punjabi, whichever, and then other languages can be brought in to support that language, to support the learning environment where all the languages are given respect. The second strategy I use is filtering instruction. The way instructions are used in the classroom and how those instructions are given to my students. Do I always use oral instructions? Do I ask students to, when they give a presentation, can they use just oral skills? Can they also bring art in the classroom or visuals in the classroom? So this comes from the research on differentiated instruction, that not every student's needs are similar. And considering the linguistic, educational, and cultural backgrounds of students, will help them feel supported in the classroom. And some of the techniques I use is addressing learner differences, like looking at different accents, looking at different languages, looking at different language skills, developing culturally responsive curriculum, bringing in topics that are they discuss at their home or they are relevant to their culture, society, some of the information they have learned previously, and linking learning to their practical life. So if you're teaching students in class, hopefully these are students who will be working in the future or they will use those skills to do some work. So making it look important for your students is really important. So I'll skip this slide, but here is what we do in the classroom. We address learner differences by not only me teaching the students, but also inviting other students to provide support. For example, through group activities, they develop a paragraph or an essay. So they write the first draft, which is reviewed by a classmate, and then they either fill out a sheet highlighting those errors or not, and then the first student repeats the draft, fixing some of the mistakes. And then it comes to me as a teacher, and I finally provide my feedback, and the student writes the final draft. So creating an environment where they're not getting help only from the teacher, but also from their peers. And when through this peer review, they normally speak their first language, which is Arabic. So they feel kind of supported. Talking about linking with practical life. So instead of teaching them about concepts like democracy, concepts like which they may not have to face right away after classroom, we try to link them with some of the issues we face every day in the classroom. For example, students leaving trash. So let's write a letter to the university administration and complaining about that. Another thing which I do to promote self-awareness is ask students to look at their own work and then self-assess it. So this kind of gives them the opportunity to check their own work. When it comes to presenting their work, they also use art. So language is not only in terms of kind of using oral skills, you can also use written skills, your drawing, your art to communicate. So when they look at their own art, they have a better understanding of explaining it. Another example is using Arabic. So like linking it with their family members. So students interview their family members in Arabic, then they bring those skills to the classroom and they reflect them, they talk about them. So switching between different languages. And when they talk about the stories of their parents, they also tell us, my parents said this in Arabic, which means this and this. So I asked them because they speak different Arabic than me, and then they go on. And then kind of student translate that for the rest of the class. The third activity is increasing student participation in the decisions you are making in the classroom. So for example, when it comes to choosing deadlines, tasks, practice materials, they also play a role in the classroom. Again, looking at how students can contribute to the classroom will provide you an opportunity to create an environment which is inclusive, an environment which provides opportunities for everybody in terms of learning and developing skills. For example, I give a survey to my students in the beginning of the classroom, then after the midterm, and towards the end of the semester. And we look at how we are progressing in terms of learning. This is just one example, but you can also do other activities where students are kind of asked about their opinions of how they're learning, how they're developing. For example, the slide I showed you earlier where we used English and Arabic, I specifically asked my students after teaching a couple of sessions, would they like me to proceed with English Arabic translation, or would they just want me to explain things in Arabic? And then if they argue for using 2 languages, 3 languages in the classroom, we continue with that. If they don't feel that, no, we should not be doing it, then we try not to promote bilingualism and multilingualism. But so far, I have not had any student who said, no, teacher, let's just learn in English, because they're learning their major in Arabic anyway. So they need to connect it with their first language or their home language. So for example, in my response, in the responses I've received from my students, they mostly talk about grammar, that we need to pay more attention to grammar. And then we include some activities where they feel supported in terms of language development and grammar skills development. And this is informed by a research study I've done in 2019, where we looked at the role teachers and students play in the classroom, who is responsible for creating a learning environment. And my findings suggest that a teacher-student learning contract should be created, where both of them are playing a role in terms of creating an academic environment. So they share responsibilities. They play a role in creating an environment. It's not just one person doing it, it's both sides. The fourth skill or strategy in my teaching adaptation model is the value clarification, clarifying students' values about languages. For example, the reason why I include value clarification is because the purpose is to increase their awareness and also correct their values in terms of values about life, education, and languages. For example, we looked at different accents or different ways of approaching languages. I remember an example from my geography classroom. So I'll use Punjabi and Urdu to speak about it because this is an example from Pakistan, but I'll first go in English. So I had a student, classmate, this is back home when I was in undergrad. We were talking about the shape and the orbits and the universe. And one of the students came from a rural area where they used a very typical accent of Arabic, which is not normally understood in the city. And everybody laughed when that student talked. So we were talking about the orbit, the movement of the Earth, and the student used, for example, in Punjabi, he said, "Zameen da rasta baz bhi hunda." Now, everybody who was from the city was kind of lost, like, what is he talking about? And then the teacher started making fun of that student because he was speaking a very specific accent which is not spoken in the city. If he was from Sargoda, the city where I come from, he would be saying, "Zameen da rasta baz bhi hunda." That's very like plain and straightforward. But he came with a heavy accent. This is what we need to promote in the language classroom, that your accent is not the only accent spoken. We've also seen how people underestimate the accents of Urdu and other languages, that there's a specific Urdu accent which you need to follow. That's not. I mean, in terms of English, for example, we see that you see different accents of English. There's no standard English accent anymore, and that's the same in other languages as well. So the instructor's role is basically to expose students to different ways of looking at things rather than imposing his or her own perspective. And the tasks focus on critical thinking, learner independence, and use of authentic language in the classroom to solve problems and also for motivation. Here's an example. So the context where I am right now in Qatar, it's a very multilingual, multicultural society. We have people from so many diverse contexts. So in the classroom, we talked about multiple cultures or multiculturalism. I asked students to look at the advantages of it, and then they gave examples. And again, we used Arabic as well to do all these activities because I want every student to feel supported. Um, and these terms may not be familiar with everybody. We take few things for granted, especially these days because of COVID-19, that students are familiar with technology, are familiar with all these terms, which they may not be able to. So they look at the advantages, disadvantages. We have a whole class discussion on it, looking at why speaking more than one language is a good idea. I remember one example from my classroom. We were talking about Muslims and Arabic. So I posed this question specifically to almost every class, asking them, do you think all Muslims should speak Arabic? And we get very interesting answers. Some students said yes, because it's the language of Quran. Everybody should speak, everybody must speak it. And then some said no, because it's translated in other languages already. So why should we learn Arabic when you can access that in other languages? And it, Arabic is not the only what would you say a requirement or it's a must thing to be recognized as a Muslim. It's not your identity as a non-Arabic speaking person. So this is how you can clarify, or how I clarify my students' values about languages. And then we also look at do some tasks. For example, that those include people from other countries who have done amazing jobs. And then I ask my students to take leadership roles. And then when they take leadership roles, they look at other leaders from different contexts. For example, from Pakistan, we have Malala Yousafzai. So they look at her as a young female leader, and they look at Greta, who is doing environmental work, or Nishad, who is from Qatar, and Marie from the US. They look at these models and then they try to see how they can become models for their own society. And again, when they give a presentation, they don't always speak. They can also use art, using their art skills to kind of express their point of view. Finally, as a teacher, we can also keep a diary, and that diary can help us see what is going well in my classroom, what is not going well in my classroom. So this is like self-evaluation. And you can also ask another colleague to come and observe you, and that person can give you some feedback. You can observe yourself. What I suggest is, for example, using this framework or this table as a chart, where you can include the successful strategies which have gone well, which have not gone well, and that will give you an opportunity to reflect upon your own strategies yourself, and then develop from there and see how you can better accommodate your students' needs. I mean, this is just like one way of looking at things. There are definitely other ways of looking at, but in today's session, I just showed how I approach these things. And the reason I'm sharing it here is because I have seen that it has worked really well in my classroom, and my students have given positive feedback. For example, have a look at these two. I'll give you a minute to read. So as you can see that the students are appreciating the use of Arabic in the classroom. So they feel supported that whatever they have learned before is welcomed in the classroom. And when I ask them to involve their family members in their learning process, where they go and ask their father, mother, sister, somebody in the family, and they talk to them in Arabic for sure. Their parents feel supported. Their parents feel like whatever they are teaching their kids is also valuable in the classroom, and that's how the learning process goes on, where everyone feels supported, and multiple languages exist in my classrooms, in terms of being equal, and in terms of welcomed in the learning process. I think I will stop here and take some questions if you have.
Thank you so very much, Raza, especially for offering all those tips and strategies regarding different languages of students to be acknowledged, and we really appreciate that. So now the floor is open for questions. If you have any questions, please post them in the chat. Maria Nisar asks, is there a need to overcome on code switching?
Well, I'm not sure what that question meant. Maria, if you could expand a little bit, what do you mean by that?
Or we can move to another question.
Okay.
I don't
All right,
see.
I think she's saying, what are the
Okay.
pedagogical implications with this perception? Well, the way I look at code switching is basically, I think the literature I was quoting is perceiving code switching in terms of a practice that is strictly monitored. So when you switch from one language to the other language, you should be strictly speaking that language. You should not be kind of coming back to the first language, or like the term I use, swimming between languages. So as teachers, we have to make decisions in terms of how we are approaching code switching. Are we asking students to use their first language in addition to the second language, or are we strictly using first language first and then completely mute students and then turn to second language? So if you are using code switching that way, then I think you're not bringing in multilingualism or bilingualism in the classroom. You're using separate languages as separate, distinct phenomena or distinct entities. What I'm proposing for is that we switch between languages in a natural way, instead of using one language first and then putting a full stop and going to the second language. Yeah.
Okay, so let me move to the chat box.
I think Surab wants to ask a question, and he's asking if he could unmute himself.
Sure, he can.
Can Surab?
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you for this webinar. Sir Kashif, my question is that talking about language policy in a context of Pakistan, like is highly multilingual. What type of language policy we should have in such country? Like, what would be the ideal language policy in such a multilingual state? Language education policy.
Right, that's correct. Thank you very much. That's a very kind of critical question, which is asked in research as well. And we've had multiple trials. But if we look at the history of Pakistan, I think it's mainly been either English or Urdu. In terms of policy, I think we got multiple perspectives. For example, one perspective looks at the policy coming from top down, that the government must be making a policy and everybody must be following it. For example, if you look at, if you go back in history, we've had, for example, in Punjab, I remember the previous government or the one before had a policy that English would be the medium of instruction, and teachers were trained to do that. And then we switched to Urdu. The other perspective is bottom up, where teachers make decisions about their classrooms. Teachers do not, well, yeah, we have to negotiate. We have to follow the government policy. We have to follow the institutional policies, but teachers also do some innovation in their classroom to promote the local languages. The way I approach policy development is to take kind of the middle ground. So there is a state policy, yes, which is, if you go back to the chart I showed you, when we create that chart, we put the state policy or the government policy there in that chart. And then we have students' languages, your languages, and the other languages which we kind of switch between. So as teachers, we can promote them in the classroom in addition to sticking with the policy of the state. And I showed some examples as well that we can keep the main language as the language of the institution. For example, where I am right now, the medium of instruction should be English in the classroom. But as a teacher, I also make choices in how I support my students' first language, or how I bring my language in the classroom. So I think it's hard to say that we can stick to particular policy in the classroom, because policy is an ongoing process rather than a strict, for example, not just a single document that says, okay, here are 5 languages you're going to use. When we go to Dr. Dudley's slides that I included, that's what he's saying, that multilingualism should be looked at holistically. it's an ongoing process. People keep dropping, people keep adding languages. So as teachers, we can support them in the classroom by integrating multiple languages in the classroom.
That's great. I would ask, be asking about your classroom. How do you support your students? And, especially in our context, we see that multilingualism or different regional languages are seen as a threat. So, what would be your message to that kind of teachers?
So I'll speak in Urdu, Amanullah, because your
Sure.
audience probably Urdu. तो पाकिस्तान में अब क्या है कि पाकिस्तान में एक तो जो स्कूल में बच्चे आते हैं मेजॉरिटी उर्दू तो लाजमी बोलते हैं क्योंकि उर्दू जो है वो हम पढ़ाते हैं, ये हमारा जो कंटेंट है मोस्टली उर्दू में है. तो जब आप एक चार्ट बनाएं उसमें इंग्लिश और उर्दू तो आपकी लाजमी इंक्लूड होगी. अब जैसे कराची जैसा शहर है जहाँ पश्तो स्पीकिंग स्टूडेंट्स भी हैं, पंजाबी स्पीकिंग भी हैं, सिंधी स्पीकिंग भी हैं, बलोची स्पीकिंग भी हैं. अगर आपकी क्लास में ऐसे स्टूडेंट्स हैं तो और आप मिसाल के तौर पे वोकैबुलरी को डिस्कस कर रहे हैं तो आप उन स्टूडेंट्स को कहें कि आप अपनी जुबान में इन चीज़ों को क्या कहते हैं. अब जब स्टूडेंट्स उन अपनी जुबान में उन चीज़ों को जो वो अल्फाज यूज़ करते हैं उनको क्लासरूम में लाएंगे तो उन्हें महसूस होगा कि क्लासरूम में एक ऐसी जगह है जहाँ मैं भी कुछ ना कुछ कह सकता हूँ. सिर्फ मेरा उस्ताद या मेरे कॉलीग्स ही नहीं या क्लासमेट्स ही नहीं है जो कुछ ना कुछ कह सकते हैं. तो और इसी तरह जब आप एक्टिविटीज़ क्रिएट करें उस एक्टिविटी में थोड़ी विंडो हो जहाँ सारे स्टूडेंट्स अपने घर में बोली जाने वाली ज़ुबान, अपने मोहल्ले में बोली जाने वाली ज़ुबान, उन सबको क्लासरूम में ले आए. अब जो आइडिया बेसिकली मैं पेश करने की कोशिश कर रहा हूँ वो ये है कि कंटेंट और लैंग्वेज दो मुख्तलिफ चीज़ें हैं जिन्हें हम कंबाइन कर सकते हैं एक मल्टीलिंगुअल पर्सपेक्टिव के ज़रिए. मल्टीलिंगुअल पर्सपेक्टिव ये होगा कि जब हम कोई टॉपिक को पढ़ रहे हैं उस टॉपिक को पढ़ने के दौरान हम मुख्तलिफ ज़ुबानों का इस्तेमाल कर सकते हैं. लाजमी नहीं कि उसमें सिर्फ एक ही ज़ुबान इस्तेमाल की जाए. मिसाल के तौर पे जैसे मैंने आपको मिसाल दी, हम अपनी ज्योग्राफी की क्लास में ऑर्बिट्स के बारे में बात कर रहे हैं, ज़मीन के रास्ते के ज़मीन किस तरह घूमती है सूरज के गिर्द. अब उसमें एक स्टूडेंट ने एक टिपिकल पंजाबी एक्सेंट में पूछा है उस्ताद से कि ज़मीन दा रस्ता बैज़ भी होता, यानी ज़मीन का जो रास्ता है वो बैज़ भी होता है. अब अगर तो वो उसी तरह के एक्सेंट में बोलता जो सरगोदा में बोला जाता है या सरगोदा यूनिवर्सिटी में बोला जाता था तो शायद उसको अप्रिशिएट किया जाता. लेकिन अब उसने अपने एक टिपिकल जो पंजाबी एक्सेंट में बात की तो हर कोई उस पे हंसा. अब एज ए टीचर हमने ये चॉइसेस क्रिएट करनी होती हैं या एक एनवायरनमेंट क्रिएट करना होता है कि जहाँ हर किसी का एक्सेंट, हर किसी की जुबान वेलकम्ड है और जिस तरह से हम रिस्पॉन्ड करते हैं उन चीज़ों को वो भी एक इमेज क्रिएट करता है जुबानों का. जैसे पश्तो के डिफरेंट एक्सेंट्स हैं. जैसे अब मुझे याद है हमारे वालिद साहब जो है वो उनके जो बिजनेस पार्टनर्स हैं वो उनकी जो पश्तो है वो उसमें फारसी का काफ़ी जो है वो मिलाप है. अब कुछ लोग ऐसे भी हैं जिनकी पश्तो बिल्कुल डिफरेंट है फारसी से. जैसे अफगानिस्तान से लोग जो आते हैं आई थिंक उनमें उनकी पश्तो में थोड़ी फारसी की झलक है. तो अब एक स्टूडेंट अगर उस तरह की पश्तो बोलता है जिसमें फारसी की झलक है और एक स्टूडेंट बोलता है जिसमें फारसी की नहीं है तो बजाय कि उसको डिस्करेज करने के हमें एक ऐसा एनवायरनमेंट क्रिएट करना चाहिए कि जहाँ हर किसी की जुबान इक्वल हो और हम अपना कंटेंट डेवलप करने के लिए या कंटेंट को समझने के लिए उन डिफरेंट जुबानों को इस्तेमाल करें. तो एज ए टीचर हम इस चीज़ को प्रमोट कर सकते हैं जहाँ हम सारी जुबानों को वेलकम करें और उनको अप्रिशिएट करें. I think some people are asking about my email address, so I'll post it here. More than
Thank you
welcome.
so much again, Kashif, for offering all these wonderful tips and strategies and sharing your expertise with us. You have really motivated me to end this session in my mother language. So, वॾी महिरबानी ऐं ॾाढो मज़ो आयो तव्हांजे सेशन में. ऐं हीअ जेका रिकॉर्डिंग आहे उहा टीचर डेवलपमेंट वेबिनार जे यूट्यूब चैनल ते मौजूदु रहंदी. तव्हां असांजा जेके सोशल मीडिया चैनल्स आहिनि उहे असांजे अॻियां जेके वेबिनार सीरीज़ अचे थी मादरी ॿोलियुनि जे आलमी ॾींहं जे हवाले सां उन हवाले सां तव्हां असांजो सोशल मीडिया चैनल जॉइन करे सघो था. ऐं ॾाढी ख़ुशी थी तव्हां सां मिली करे ऐं महिरबानी।
Thank you, Manula. And I'm glad that you ended it in your mother tongue. And I hope that in future sessions, you will speak some Sindhi so that your student Sindhi speakers also feel motivated.
बिल्कुल,
Sure.
महिरबानी।
Thank you. Nirvani.